question for today is this. If your organization is breached, is the bigger problem or the biggest risk the disruption to your operations or the impact to your clients? I want you to really sit with that question for a moment because most CISOs answer it too quickly, and when they do, they usually get it wrong. The instinctive answer is internal, right? It's downtime, recovery cost, incident response, regulatory notification, insurance. All of these things matter, but in a growing number of industries, and especially professional services, those are not the dominant losses anymore. The dominant loss is external. It's the client impact. It's client liability. It's client trust. So today, I'm going to use professional services as the lens for this conversation because this industry expresses the risk more clearly than almost any other. But if you're a CISO in healthcare, manufacturing, retail, technology, education, or government, don't tune out because the mechanisms are exactly the same, only the labels change. In other words, this conversation is applicable to you. Professional service firms are attacked for one primary reason: trust concentration. They hold sensitive client data like legal records, financial statements, intellectual property, strategic plans, contracts, investigations. And in many cases, they also hold privileged access into the client's environment. They have administrative credentials, remote management tools, and shared platforms. That combination is incredibly valuable to attackers, not because these firms are careless, not because they're weak, but because one successful intrusion creates leverage across many downstream victims. And leverage is what modern attackers are optimized for. Now, here's where the bias shows up. When most CISOs think about breaches, they default to an internal impact model. They think about restoring systems, preserving evidence, meeting regulatory requirements, getting the business back online. That mental model works reasonably well for a standalone enterprise, but it breaks down in professional services and in any organization that operates as a platform or an advisor or an integrator or a managed provider. Because in those environments, a breach is rarely just one event. It's a multiplier. The February cyber risk forecast made this very explicit. Ransomware and data extortion are trending up with a very high likelihood in professional services, not simply because of the volume of data, but because attackers can weaponize client trust through double and triple extortion. In other words, one breach doesn't create one crisis, it creates many. So let me pause here because this is where executive conversations often derail. Executives tend to frame incidents in internal cost terms, like how long were we down? How quickly did we restore? Did we lose data? What did the incident response cost? And, did we do all the regulatory requirements that we needed to? Those are all necessary questions, but they're not sufficient. From the client's perspective, your breach is not an IT event. It's a judgment event, right? Clients don't care that your backup worked. They don't care that the systems were restored within your recovery time objective. They care about whether their data was exposed. They care about whether their operations were disrupted and whether they can continue to trust you as a custodian of their most sensitive information. And once that trust is damaged, it's extremely difficult to repair. This is why client attrition and liability often exceed internal recovery costs in professional service incidents. Even when the technical damage appears limited, the downstream consequences can be enormous. Now, let's talk about why this happens, because it's not accidental. The root cause is architecture. Most professional firms and many other organizations unintentionally allow client data and privileges to span multiple engagements. There's shared storage, broad access roles, and a flat network. And administrative tools can be used across environments. All of this makes operational efficiency, and that makes sense. But it also creates a shared failure domain. When an attacker gains a foothold, they don't just gain access to one system or one client, they inherit at scale. They inherit the trust between the environments. They inherit the reach of the administrative tools. This is why segmentation matters so much, and not just in professional services. When client environments are properly isolated, a breach becomes one incident instead of many, and liability is contained. Trust damage is limited and legal exposure is reduced. But when that doesn't happen, a single intrusion can cascade across multiple clients, industries, and even geographies. The February cyber forecast is very clear on this point. Controls in this area are only moderately effective, not because teams are negligent, not because trust-based access and operational efficiencies inherit reduced isolation. That trade-off has already been made, often without executives fully understanding the risk consequences. This is another place where bias shows up. Executives tend to assume that audits, certifications, contracts, questionnaires equal safety. Those controls matter, but they're governance mechanisms, not containment mechanisms. Governance depends on visibility and cooperation. They don't stop zero-day exploits. They don't stop compromised credentials. And they do not stop malicious updates delivered through trusted channels. When an attacker is already operating inside a trusted partner, governance doesn't remove that access. Architecture does. This is the shift CISOs need to drive in their executive conversations. The right question is no longer, can we prevent a breach? The right question is, when a breach happens, how many clients are affected? And that reframing changes everything. It moves cybersecurity from prevention promise, which no one can honestly make, into a liability management strategy. A liability management strategy. Segmentation becomes a legal control. Least privilege becomes a reputation control. And isolation becomes a business continuity control. This is how CISOs should be talking to their executives today. Not in terms of tools, not in terms of maturity scores, but in terms of downstream harm. Explain that your job is not just to protect systems, it is to limit the blast radius, to reduce the number of clients who become collateral damage, and to protect the firm's right to operate. This applies far beyond professional services. If you think about it, this probably applies to you and your organization. If you're managed service providers, if you have a SaaS platform, cloud integration, healthcare vendors, manufacturers with shared OT platforms, retailers with third-party logistics and payment providers, across all industries, attackers are targeting access multipliers, organizations that hold trust at scale. The firms that will survive this environment are not the ones promising perfect security. They are the ones engineering containment. They are the ones who assume breach and they design for limitation. They are the ones who prepare executives to lead through a trust event, not just a technical incident. Because in today's threat landscape, breaches are inevitable. Client cascades are not.